to the Media Roundtable Special Edition, where we dive into the secrets of the craft of audio advertising and provide our perspective on industry topics in service of marketers responsible for the success of their audio program, the Chief Audio Officer. Today, I'm your host, Giles Martin, EVP of Strategy and Insights at Oxford Road. As you may know, we hosted the second annual Chief Audio Officer Summit in Los Angeles, where we heard from brand marketers and other industry leaders on a range of topics, including measurement, messaging optimization, and audio's role in the marketing mix, along with several other topics. The session that we're sharing with you today is all about the new case study that we partnered with Podscribe to put together called the PodLoad Report, where we discuss the dangers of rising podcast ad loads. Pete Birsinger, the CEO and founder of Podscribe, joined me on stage to present this report. We believe it is an industry-first report that we are bringing to market and one that is important to all parties in the industry, publishers, advertisers, and also listeners. We think it's a topic that's been flying under the radar for a while, even though there have been increasing publications showing PodLoad increasing in podcasting. But we're the first ones, we believe, to connect the dots between the increasing pod load and performance for marketers. And we're flagging this issue. We want to make a discussion point of it. We want to make it a topic of conversation in the industry. We want to make it an element of negotiations between media sellers and buyers. And we also have a proposal for the industry, which we're calling the Oxford Clock, which is a recommendation as to how publishers can assign the time in every hour of programming between editorial content and ads. So with that said, let's hear the session.
A bit of context for this conversation here. When I started in podcasts in 2018, shortly after that, there were a spate of acquisitions as the industry started to mature, and particularly radio companies that perhaps were struggling to find some freshness and some areas for growth started acquiring podcast companies in a hurry and paying some pretty extraordinary prices at the time. You had iHeart acquiring Stuff Media, for example. You had SiriusXM acquiring Stitcher, Amazon acquiring Wondery, et cetera, et cetera. And when these radio companies and tech companies acquired the podcasts publishers, they quickly discovered that they, having paid an enormous amount of money for it, they were not squeezing a lot of dollars out of it, particularly relative to radio. You think about radio, there's a significant amount of commercials there, but 5-6 years ago in podcasts, you may only have 1 or 2 commercials in the hour. So the amount of monetization that the industry was getting out of the listening was very, very small. And what we've seen since that time is a concerted effort, understandably, on the part of all these publishers to close that gap and get more dollars out of every hour of listening. And there's a lot of audio listening out there, as we talked about. So this chart reflects the progress that they've made, and you can see the gap has been closed significantly in that time. Now, this chart is just showing the amount of dollars that are being spent in these channels relative to the amount of listening. So we're now going to share some data about the actual ad load itself.
So I think we could begin first by defining ad load. It was coming up a bit last night with Brittany and Ashley. So when we talk about ad load here, you can imagine a 100-minute episode, and if 10 minutes of that 100-minute episode are ads, then we'd call that a 10% ad load. So what percent of the entire episode is ads? So that's the definition that we're using here. So similar to Giles's chart on that slide before, what we can see, as I think probably most of you can sense anecdotally, the ad load in podcasting is rising. Maybe it's a necessity for the medium, hard to say, but there is a clear trend, as you can see with the green line, of it moving upwards. Interestingly, you actually can notice some spikes in dips. Q4 has been the highest in ad load every single quarter, actually, which there are probably some reasons for that, but it does stand out with a dip, I think, in the minor recession in 2023. So, and to clarify, these are based on ads that we have labeled in podcasts with over 20,000 downloads in the past 3 years. So the trend is increasing. I guess we'll see where it ends up at. So, all right. So then if we look at the data actually a different way, what if we want to see, how are they actually broken out? So what we see is most podcasts are typically in the 5 to 10% range. Some are a bit lower, some are a bit higher. What you do see is they do really drop off after 15%. That is a relative rarity. So the clustering is in the 5 to 10% range. So if you guessed that, you were on point. And yeah, I'll turn it over.
Yeah, I think what's also important context here is people's perceptions of the ads. So this is some data from a Sounds Profitable study that was released just a month or two ago, and they're asking, how annoyed do you feel about the ads, essentially, and you can see, 48% of people saying they either enjoy them or don't mind them at all. So people have, high tolerance for the ads. They're saying that they don't mind them. Generally, it's a pretty good experience relative to other channels. And that's actually corroborated by some other research, also published by Sounds Profitable this year. And the question here was, this was the percentage of the users of each channel who said they watch or listen to all of the ads in that channel. And so of all of these channels, podcasts clearly is giving a better ad experience to the listeners, which I think intuitively, we would anticipate, but it's great to see that backed up by data as well. So we see the ad loads increasing. We see consumers telling us that the ads aren't really much of a problem, but what people say and what they do are two quite different things. As marketers, we should all know that. I've been saying I'll go to the gym for about 7 years now.
All right. So here we arrive at the punchline, which to date, we're not really sure of anybody who has done this before, but what we did is we took all of the campaigns that we were measuring where we could find an ad associated with them, and then we took the ad load of those episodes and then plotted it against performance. So this chart is visitor rate. The next one will be purchase rate, but what you can see is the trend here. There is a definite trend of declining performance as the ad load does increase. So you might ask, well, what's happening with 2% and 4%? I think that there weren't that many. There were fewer shows at 2, and we think generally it might be shows that they're newer into podcasting, but generally once you hit about 4 to 5%, it's downhill after that in terms of ad load. So if we so actually if we go to the purchase rate slide. So one thing to note here in terms of a rough frame of reference is that if you can roughly expect if the ad load of an episode goes from 5% to 15%, you can reasonably expect a 30 to 40% drop off in conversion rate. So that of course isn't guaranteed, but that's roughly what we see from the data here. So, and with, of course, as advertisers, the ideal amount is, of course, you probably want to be the only ad on the episode. From the publisher side, I guess you've got to make your money, so it comes out to really what is the ideal amount that they can sell. And of course, there is definitely some drop off where it's just not worth it anymore to advertisers because it gets too cost prohibitive. So,
do you want a quick plug?
And here is actually a quick screenshot of our platform showing you can search and filter by ad load on Podscribe. So
we think that these results are pretty eye-opening for the industry, to put it mildly. That's potentially 30% plus increase in cost per acquisition. If you're moving, into that sort of teen range in terms of percentage of ad load versus that, more efficient 5% range. So there are big implications for advertisers here. We're going to name some of the publishers and some of the shows that were currently showing some of the highest ad load, but we thought we'd actually flip it for now and accentuate the positive, one of the themes of the day. So these are the top 5 publishers in terms of having a relatively low ad load. Q-Code, Audioboom, Gumball, et cetera, and these publishers obviously are doing very well in the market. They've got long-standing, consistent relationships with brands like BetterHelp and HelloFresh and Audible. And based on data from your platform, Pete, I mean, they're consistently getting renewal rates of over 50%. So there's obviously, it's a fine balance to be had, but we think that there's plenty of room for publishers to succeed with these lower types of ad rates. And what we would like to propose to the industry is an advertising clock that is a sort of a standard that we can come back to. Now, obviously, there are going to be circumstances where different types of ad insertions or placements are going to be made, but this can be used as a rule of thumb. This can be used as something that we can come back to as an industry, and we'd like to see these two-minute mid-rolls with ideally, endorsed reads and for both of those, but failing that, to see at least 160 in both of those mid-rolls, and then you possibly could split those into another 60 or 230s that potentially could be, dynamically or programmatically inserted. And then at the top and the bottom of the show, another minute allocated, again, ideally endorsed, also could be split into 230s, but this would maintain an ad load of around 10% in an hour. And actually, we feel that that's kind of high, given the trends and the correlations that you just saw. I mean, once you get over that 6% hump, you start to see that performance drop off. And so, you might expect your buyers, your agency, to be even potentially pushing for discounts once you get over that 6% range. So this is something that we want to put on the agenda. We want to make part of conversations in the industry moving forward. It needs attention. And it's not just about the advertisers, it's also about the listener experience and maintaining the health of that.
So there will be more details in the case study that's published. One thing that we do want to look at is not just the effect of the total ad load number, but also to where the ads are placed. So what if instead of those two ads being together there, what if you made two ad islands separated by 15 minutes apart? So I think there's more to come there. The trend is definitely clear. Greater ad load generally reduces performance, but there's more to be seen for sure.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Let's recap briefly. What we saw here is an increase in PodLoad in the marketplace that's been going on for some time, which you may well be aware of, but a negative correlation between that increasing PodLoad and performance and response rates for marketers, both at the top and the bottom of the funnel. So finally, you saw a recommendation from Oxford Road as to how the publishers in the market could set their clocks. That is to say, how they should divvy up time between editorial time and advertising time, and what recommendations we would make to improve the market, both for advertisers, publishers, and also for listeners as well. Preserving the listener experience, obviously, is a very important aspect of the future health of the podcast market. We want to thank all our wonderful sponsors and partners of the CAO Summit, including Spotify, Seeker, SiriusXM, QCode, Odyssey, PMM, and many others. We also want to thank Podscribe, specifically Pete and Amelia, for their collaboration, their support in getting this project done, getting the analysis done, sharing data with Oxford Road, and making this report possible for the market. Thank you all for joining the Media Roundtable. This podcast is brought to you by Oxford Road, where we want you to succeed in audio and to use influence for good. As members of the marketing community, we have the power to advance voices that don't just entertain, but edify, to build bridges across differences and preserve fair-minded discussion around the most important topics of our age. If you're a marketer looking to align your brand values with extraordinary business outcomes, reach out to our agency, Oxford Road, by visiting oxfordroad.com and subscribing to our weekly newsletter, The Influencer. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any feedback or suggestions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us at info@mediaroundtable.com. And if you haven't heard about it, Ad Infinitum is Oxford Road's audio creative focused podcast hosted by Stu Redwine, VP of Creative Services. Start at episode 1 to get a better understanding of what makes audio ads work and how they can work better. Each episode breaks down real recent audio ads from top spenders across podcast, radio streaming, and even SiriusXM. Episodes feature expert guests like Amanda DeMarco from Veritonic, Dallas Taylor, host of 20,000 Hertz, and Richard Schotten, author of The Choice Factory. Season 2 of Ad Infinitum is underway now. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. Finally, thank you to Haley, Bianca, Kyle, Ezra, Mary Jane, Everett, Neil, and the team at Podcast One. As always, influence responsibly.